brought sweaters. This is Mystery and Speculative Crossovers at Readercon. And before we do the traditional introduce everybody, I'm going to read a quick description of the panel, and then I have everyone say who they are and why they're interested in this panel. There are many books that draw from both the speculative fiction and mystery toolboxes in both macro waves, trying to be a the city and the city, Peter F. Hamilton's Breaking the Road, catalyzed by Harvey and murder communications, and microwaves. Urban fantasy is initially defined by its relationship to noir, and now often more evident in tone of plot. By the way, reading out loud statements is very bad. Where is this crossover most satisfying? How do magic and advanced technology open up new avenues of investigation or methods of befuddling the detectives? How have trends, tropes, and developments in each genre influence crossover works? Now that we've had our panel description, which is nice and broad and just lots of room to play with, I think we can start.
Good morning, I'm Meriah Crawford. I'm a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. I teach research and writing primarily. I'm also a private investigator. I've been doing that for about 12 years now. I did it full time for a while. And that was a lot of my interest. I write mysteries, I write sci-fi and fantasy as well.
My name is Gerwel, and I am primarily known as a blogger in the field. I write for the blog The King of Elfland's Second Cousin, which is a blog of basically criticism and nonfiction about science fiction and fantasy. And generally, I love mysteries, both as just sort of straight mainstream mysteries and crime fiction, as well as also mysteries that cross over into speculative fiction. And in my own fiction writing, that's what I find I tend to do a lot of. I sort of bring elements of both genres into play together. And I love thinking about it and writing it. And reading, of course.
I'm Gilman. I'm a fantasist. 2 years ago, I found myself writing Jacobean metaphysical noir mysteries featuring Ben Johnson, PI. So I'd be interested in discovering for myself how I got there.
Hi everybody, I'm Kaufmann. I wrote a book called Dying is My Business and its sequel, Die and Stay Dead. They're both urban fantasy, noir, detective, horror novels, mishmashes. And I'm super thrilled to be here with an actual private detective. Yeah, it's going to be cool to hear about it.
That comes shoes on.
And I'm Adam Lipkin. I'm the panel moderator or leader, as they like to use the terminology here at Readercon. I am a reviewer for Publishers Weekly for the science fiction, fantasy, horror, romance, general fiction, and literary biography sections. I also used to review YA. Having said all that, my favorite genre to actually read for pleasure when I'm not getting paid is mystery and crime. So I always appreciate it when I have the opportunity to sizzle words as well. And like I said, this is a very, very broad panel topic. So we are even a little bit of jumping because speculative fiction alone is huge. When we're talking about various points of intersect with mystery, we're talking about a lot of potential points. But I maybe start with something Nicholas said on because it's in the panel description as well, which is the recognition of urban fantasy's connection to noir. The fact that certainly, totally, even the non-mystery driven urban fantasy tends to have a very noir tone. But there's also a good chunk of urban fantasy that actually contains crime and mystery and detection, but also contains things that defy traditional mystery tropes or make a lot of them irrelevant. Horror can't necessarily do the same things in a paranormal mystery or urban fantasy that they might be able to do a traditional crime novel. Who's working for what's, etc. So that we just I'm not thinking you would want to go off the top. You live in that world, I think, a little bit writing-wise. So if you want to start, maybe we'll sort of riff from there.
Well, I think there are possibly two schools of urban fantasy that play into this idea of what kind of clues and stuff you can use. The first is a world where magic is just known. It's institutionalized. There are departments of magic. There are people who are, have on their placard, PI investigating magic stuff or whatever. And then there's the other school, which is that magic is hidden. And so you have your detective character as someone who's very special and it's like clued into that magic world. And I think that plays a lot into what you can do with tropes. Because if you're dealing with a world where magic or the supernatural is hidden, you can't have, the city ME performing an autopsy on someone and being like, well, this is a werewolf, this is a vampire, or this is whatever, there are a lot of, it's tricky, it is tricky, absolutely. I'm unsure how to bring it all together for that, but I think my opinion would be very much depends on what school of urban fantasy you're writing, whether your cops will understand how to deal with the supernatural threat or won't, or will be surprised by the supernatural threat.
Yeah, I find myself dealing with the tension between mystery, lowercase, and mystery, uppercase, between plots and puzzles and the greater game. I was interested in writing with Ben Johnson as a private detective because he hated fantasy. He actually took as a motto in front of one of his plays, non hic centauros. Here you will find no centaurs, no harpies, no gorgons. My page is smack of man. And he is actually investigating in my novellas supernatural fantasies, and he never quite catches on what the larger game is. He does solve the terrestrial mystery, but it is interesting how tangential you can make somebody and yet have him not quite intersect.
So I think that the intersection between noir and urban fantasy and noir and science fiction as well is particularly interesting for the areas where speculative fiction takes certain techniques from noir and also which techniques it does not take. So like I look at noir, for example, and I look at noir's focus on the individual and the individual struggle from a thematic standpoint.
Yeah.
And that's something that is also very much core to urban fantasy as a subgenre in fantasy. The noir stylistic elements, the noir tonal elements, the use of similes everywhere and stuff like that wouldn't necessarily ring true in an epic fantasy type of setting, but in an urban fantasy that is focused on the individual trying to solve the mystery, solve the crime, catch the killer, whatever it is, it works very, very well.
Something that I'm really aware of for a number of reasons is the really tight relationship between urban environments and crime and injustice, all of which go together very well, today in many of our cities. And it's something I've seen as a private investigator, which has been really horrifying for me as a person and really useful for me as a writer. Yay. And it's paid well, so there we go. So I think they all come together really well, and the private investigator as a character in straight up mystery as well as paranormal mystery is perfect because it's somebody who works alone and can therefore hide whatever they need to hide really effectively. I very much manage what I tell my clients. I got hold of some really useful autopsy photos, and the client really wanted copies of them, and that didn't happen because that was not going to happen. And those are things that the PI has all this kind of control over. I decide what to talk about when I'm in court. I decide how to present the evidence I collect. And all of those interviews I conduct, I decide what happens with that. So there's all kinds of secrecy that becomes possible and all kinds of management of realities that becomes possible that works out really well.
Which leaves a lot of play for all sort of the underlying ethics of basically investigation, which is a theme that is fundamental to so much of the noir tradition in mainstream fiction, and which urban fantasy also does play a lot with as well, in terms of some of the difficult choices that people have to make.
And the reality, too, is that there are ethical choices to be made every day.
Yeah, Ben Johnson fits in really well with the noir tradition before it happened. He was a tough guy. He killed. He was a completely urban creature. So the fact that there are and very sternly ethical. So the fact that there are mysteries and mysteries, the way they intersect is interesting to me. Oh, and I forgot to say, of course, I have been a forensic librarian. I actually did help solve a mystery at Harvard, and it was my expert witness testimony that put a guy in for 15 to 20. He was a book thief and a book destroyer.
Kelly Lick has this idea of characters that are compelling or that readers would like are characters who start one peg down from everyone else. I think that's a great idea, and I think it also ties into the idea of noir very well. It's rare in noir to have a detective-type character who is having a good day. He doesn't have some disposition. He's not like, he doesn't have a full bank account. He's not like a joy.
They're seedy people.
Right, and that one peg down is
Only the fictional.
No, it's part of the genre.
It is a trope.
You're not a genre PI by your life.
Well, the story should tell us. That'd be awesome.
That's related.
Yeah. So, one of the things I know when I first looked at the panel description, and when I think about this topic, I initially thought of it as sort of a blend. So I thought, when you've got a mix of sci-fi and or fantasy mixing together a mystery. But I wonder if what happens when it's more genre like sci-fi fantasy horror type things sort of edging slightly into the mystery style. So I'm thinking of situations like Sarah Graham's novels, where she books, where you've got a novel that can be read as straight up mystery story, but then there's hints of potential supernatural elements you can choose to ignore if you wish. Or similarly, Ben Winter's novels are overtly science fiction. The last releasing of the 2 seasons of that, which are about the end of the world, science fiction topic. But it's basically just day-to-day crime stuff, just in a situation where society just happens to break down. But I'm wondering if in a case like that, in a case where mystery is still the dominant, clearly the dominant genre. It's not like a 50-50 split. It's more like 80-20. Ben Winter's one a negative, a Hugo, that sort of thing. Does that change? Does that change like how we view the genre elements as far as do we kind of prefer to just sort of ignore that we're trying to approach this as readers? Do we does it in many ways become stronger because it's such a it's almost like linchpin as opposed to just sort of underlying theme, and also just thinking more generally about the second novel. Are there particularly good books, other ones that seem to really that play well either purely on the mystery side or the flip side, purely on the science fiction side, so the mystery element maybe creeps in later or in a way that's unexpected?
I think that the Ben Winter's example that you brought up is actually a really very good one. Because I sort of look at that as being the usage of the science fictional elements to add additional stressors to the protagonist within the story. I mean, that's what so much of basically what makes characters in mysteries, and especially in noir tradition mysteries, engaging, is the fact that they're having such bad days. And the science fictional elements add to that stress and show different types of stresses than one would normally have if one were, say, for example, reading like a Tony Hillerman tribal police novel. And coming at the novel, obviously I'm a speculative fiction person, so I look at those speculative fiction elements and I pick up on them. But I think that for a lot of readers, when they read it, that's the perception that they bring to it, that, okay, this is something different that adds a different kind of stress to the character, which is more engaging solely for the sake of novelty, if nothing else, other than its excellent execution, especially in Ben Winter's case.
I think what fantasy or science fiction can add to mystery is that it reifies, it makes real the metaphors, so that, there actually is a tarantula on that slice of angel food cake. it takes the sort of lively, fantastical metaphors that, say, Raymond Chandler makes, and it makes, it's in a world where they can be real.
Well, it's interesting, I think, that when you say that, because so much, especially the noir tradition, is built on simile, it's construction, on analogy. The mouth of the loser looked like the Second Street tunnel.
Yes,
and
it is the Second Street tunnel, and the traffic is pouring out.
Exactly.
Which you can do, because we're free to do that.
And I like when the speculative element is used thematically for the mystery as well. And I think that's very much the case with the Ben Winters novels. I think it's not just, oh, by the way, it's also the end of the world. I think that end of the world plays very much into the mysteries and the characters and everything that they're feeling and doing.
So far as Raymond Chandler felt when he got up in the morning, it was the end of the world.
I do think that probably most literature revolves around crime of every genre, or a quest of some kind, which is arguably also an investigation.
Oh yeah.
I always think of Harry Potter. I've actually taught a Harry Potter class, and their search for the Horcruxes is totally an investigation. As is a whole lot of other stuff. You think your husband's cheating on you, you're going to investigate. So that's a thing that is probably not really thought about very much, but crime and mystery and investigation is sort of what life revolves around.
Science, of course, is an investigation.
People aren't real keen on science, though. I'm one of those people who fights those battles on Facebook. Somebody says something like, "I don't believe in vaccination. I have to." And I really need to stop doing that. It's bad for my blood pressure. But also, though, on the mystery side, people are a lot more limited in what they want to read. So there's a cozy reader who will read only cozies, and if you dare to have a bloody corpse on the floor, they're going to have a problem with it. And that's
Hobbit cozies.
You could actually. The hobbits are pretty cozy, as long as they're not getting killed. You can't kill a hobbit, I guess. Can't kill a dog. They totally should have had those eagles fly in there, but whatever. And so on the mystery side, the minute you throw a vampire in, you've done something that's not mystery anymore. So that's sort of an interesting phenomenon that I've noticed on the mystery side. Somebody like Charlene Harris is allowed in the room because she also writes traditional mysteries, but if you're only writing mysteries that have that speculative element, you're going to find it's not as welcoming and which is it's an interesting phenomenon.
I find it very, very interesting that there's this sort of intersection of three genres that is happening and has been incredibly popular in the sense of basically science fiction romance, paranormal romance, and urban fantasy and mystery, where you basically get these elements of the romance genre intersecting with the mystery genre and with the romance genre, in the likes of Laurel K. Hamilton and Charlene Harris and stuff like that.
And Laurel Hamilton doesn't come to the mystery genre. She goes to the romance and the fantasy stuff, and maybe horror as well. Horror, yeah. So, I mean, it is an interesting. And vampires are actually awesome because they can be all of those things.
Yeah, they are the ideal intersection of genres. They're like vampires at the crossroads.
Yeah, you do get everything depending on how you're writing.
And I have this personal theory myself that at the heart of every horror story, and maybe also fantasy and science fiction stories as well, there is a mystery. What is going on? You think of Peter Straub's ghost story, and it's very much an investigation into what's happening, because the old men who are sort of the center of the novel are trying to find out why they're being haunted, or if they're in fact even being haunted, and they bring in an expert, but it's not, the detective character here is not an actual detective or police officer. He's I think the son or the nephew of one of the old men, and he's a horror writer. And they're like, well, what do you think is going on here? Bring us your expertise as a horror writer. So I think mystery is one of those spices that can be added to any genre, really. Even romance, or even literary fiction has a lot of mystery at its heart, too. So I think be liberally sprinkled pretty much anywhere.
Humans are nosy.
Sure.
Well, it also gives any kind of mystery gives a significant boost of momentum to the plot as well, and any story, because all of a sudden there is an objective for the character to work towards, whatever that objective is, like it's not constructed so much as a quest usually, but I guess, yeah, a quest essentially just solves a mystery or to figure out who done it, basically.
No, I think often people read mysteries because they come out.
There's an answer at the end.
There's an answer at the end. Actually.
There's so often isn't in real life.
Yeah, I had a death in the family, and I found myself plunging. One of the reasons that I'm writing these mysteries is that I found myself plunging into reading mysteries because they come out, and they come out, and they come out, and you find the answer, and that's very comforting to people. So again, I think there's the tension of the environment, the darkness of the environment, and the fact that there's an answer.
The last story I had accepted is a mystery story involving a road trip, and it has an ambiguous ending, and a few people really hated it for that reason.
Oh yeah.
They need to know what happened.
I don't think you should, I think people should write them because it's exploring and expanding the genre, but a lot of people do read mystery for the click at the end.
Well, that also sort of ties in very closely to the whole idea of conventions within genre. And while speculative fiction is a very, very broad genre, other genres like mystery or like romance tend to be have more established conventions. Like if you write a romance without the happily ever after at the end, you're going to get a lot of flack. And it might be a nice little book, but nevertheless, you're still going to get flack. And I think that's also sort of one of the tensions that exists when trying to bring elements of mystery into speculative fiction, where with speculative fiction, it's not quite as conventionalized, if that's a word, as much as mystery genre is. So your crossover readers who come from a mystery background may be disappointed by what they find in speculative fiction that has mystery elements.
Along those lines, does future technology and science fiction then disqualify to a certain extent from being mystery?
I don't think so.
No, but I think it heightens the mysteries. It can give you a different kind of mystery. If it's an unknown type of technology, or the technology can open up clues that we can't even conceive of right now.
Now, the other thing that would be boring is if you have telepathic, you can just go, okay, yes.
Although, interesting enough, actually, I'm very glad that you mentioned that, because the first thing I thought of when you asked your question was, it's not so much of a mystery as a crime novel. And that's Alfred Bester's The Demolished Man, about somebody trying to commit a murder in a society filled with telephones. And it's first of all, it's an awesome book. If you have not read it, I very much recommend it. Alfred Bester's The Demolished Man.
And they did have a really nice way of coping with that, and also a not very technological way, which is nice. I will say one of the worst things that ever happened to the mystery novel is the cell phone. And also to society, but that's a whole other conversation. And there are a lot of people who think that being a private investigator nowadays is just you sit, you use the computer, and you make a couple of phone calls, and you're good to go. The last case I got, the lawyer said the problem I'm having with the PI I'm working with is all she does is she sits and she uses the computer and she makes phone calls. So there's a huge amount that's still legwork, but the cell phone does eliminate all kinds of, I can't warn somebody about the threat because there's no way to reach them, so I have to drive, and there's all this drama, or whatever else there is.
Someone's stalking me, not
right. Yeah, you just call, or you can pull up in your mapping software. I'm like, oh, I can go that way. It's good. And you can get all this information from databases and stuff. There is a level of magic now in the technology we have on GPS trackers and drones and things like that that PIs have access to. So that does become a real problem for the mystery writer. You can solve that by going historical.
Well, another thing is that's why tropes are modern. So tropes that mystery is sort of a genre that sort of had a set of tropes that lasted for 7 itself when it's forced writers to start thinking about ways around it. Sometimes it's just the sudden electrical storm, you know, reverse the excitement mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of scenes now in books and movies where they're like, my cell phone's not working.
This whole novel still works. But yeah, I mean, with all technology, just as you know, as you move the story forward, just as technology eliminates things that might have happened in the past, and you know, nowadays we install DNA evidence, all sorts of things that change how these work on one hand. They open up all sorts of new possibilities. So you know, once you start, you know, so we have DNA evidence. Well, before there's cloning, and all of a sudden that shifts the mystery stuff again.
And at the same time, to that point, the evolution of technology actually can often become a feature out of the bug in those mysteries. I mean, the rise of the police procedural is tracked almost exactly in time with the rise of forensic science. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Starting with cigarette ash.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I was wondering to what extent readers of these two different kinds of books would accept the interpolation of the other. Greer said that you kind of all agree that one of the things that mystery novels have an explanation at the end. Not just an answer, but an explanation that takes all the way back to the whole story. What if you had a mystery novel that was an ordinary mystery novel, turned into that all set in the real world? The conclusion ended up by demonstrating that the thing that the private detective could not figure out has to finally assent to at the end is the person who's trapped in the same world.
So
that would that be accepted by mystery readers, or would that seem not an explanation at all?
Well, at risk of going a little spoilery, the current Stephen King novel, which is his mystery series, the sequel to Mr. Mercedes, which is called Finders Keepers, the coda at the end, so the main plot is all traditional mystery, but all of a sudden the second book, and it's grounded in the real-world mystery series, one where in the first book he made sure to emphasize that things like Carrie and other things are moving through this world, and that this was not part of this sort of overall shared universe. All of a sudden at the coda we get genre. And I am very fascinated in looking at some of the reactions to it. I feel like I can mention, because Laura Lipkin mentioned that in her New York Times review of the book, so it is known, but at the same time, it is done in such a way that I am waiting to see. I haven't seen anyone who's been reading it who came in with pure mystery expectations yet, but I think because Stephen King's name still is Stephen King.
The name gives you certain
right, but Mr. Mercedes was absolutely straightforward. It wasn't a mystery novel because you didn't get it, but it was a thriller. It was a straightforward novel.
What Jonathan calls a slingshot,
yeah,
story forward on a certain basis, all the way to the end, and all of a sudden the end goes.
Exactly.
I would say from a mystery standpoint that that's a rule you don't break. That if you're going to have vampires, you got to introduce them early. You can't introduce what they call woo at the end.
I think of one, and I wish I remember the name of the book, but Cindy Sheldon, of all people, wrote a spy novel, and I wish I could remember which one it was. That it was a very traditional London-esque spy novel for like 7/8 of the novel, and then the ending was, oh, it's a UFO. And I sat there thinking, where the hell did this come from? And it wasn't because I had mystery expectations, because first of all, Cindy Sheldon, we didn't go in with traditional, mystery expectations anyway. But it was just, there's a point at which it's just a question, frankly, a question of writing skill. If you're a good enough writer, if King did Seed stuff, for example, you can make that slingshot work because you've done something to establish that world working in a certain way. Sheldon, on the other hand, did not. And I actually saw what he was trying to do, which is he was trying to make as much of a surprise for the reader as it is, to the characters.
Jumping out, boom, does not work. It's childish.
Yeah.
But I think my answer is going to be that, like yours, a good enough writer can carry off practically anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all down to execution. But I think the trick in doing that kind of execution effectively boils down to how you set and shape the reader's expectations, the breadcrumbs that you leave for the reader throughout the quote-unquote normal part of that kind of a story. Because generally what I find a lot of mystery readers like to see is they like to feel like they are one step ahead of the protagonist. They can sort of see what's coming, even if not necessarily consciously, that they've got a set of expectations that the story either then subverts or fulfills. And so if something comes out at the end that totally plays with those expectations that the author has set up, up to that ending, then that can throw them for a loop. But with good breadcrumbs leading up to it, that may be subtly woven in, then that can work. But it all boils down to execution.
The narrator did it.
It's funny because I've certainly seen the opposite of what you're talking about a lot of times. Like Dean Koontz in particular will write what appear to be supernatural mysteries, but then give it a scientific solution at the end. But the other way, I do see that.
Yeah.
Question up front.
Responding to what John was saying about sunshine, I can't remember the title of the character, part of Kate Wilhelm's several novels about a husband and wife detective couple. And there was one of those that had some serious science fiction elements on it, and very bizarrely, it published in 2 different versions, one of which had all the science fiction stuff removed from it.
Really?
Reading this collection that the detective wants and said, well, that's interesting, there's something missing. And then I discovered another version of it, and like, whoa, this is what she really meant.
I'm curious, so how did the plot work without, I mean, was it just the elements were so gratuitous?
It didn't really completely work.
Okay.
But there's something, this person was just had either being influenced by aliens or was just crazy. But it was very strange.
I have a question back.
You mentioned mystery readers liking to feel that there are seven people in the story. Do you think that's more of a mystery trope than a trope of our genre? Because I know a lot of people, including recently myself, who look at this and say, why doesn't this character see what's going on? I think it seems to me that more people in our genre like to have people who are stretching.
Oh, I think it's universal. I think it's just a condition of the human condition that when we read, we like to be able to sort of piece the pieces of the puzzle together in parallel or just slightly ahead of what we're seeing on the page. Because that's also what sort of gives us that thrill of anticipation when we read, regardless of genre. It's not something that's exclusive to mystery, I don't think. But I think that in mysteries in particular, the significant momentum that the mystery gives to the story sort of puts that into greater relief.
I do think also, sometimes, this may be my own interpretation, not what Chris is saying, but that we like to see where the story is going. We're okay if we're completely wrong, as long as we can then look back and say, oh yeah, I see the footsteps leading up to that. Yeah. So, and that's the case in science fiction or in mystery. So I think, predicting sometimes in fact predicting what's going to happen and then finding every one of your expectations met is, that's incredibly underwhelming. It's sort of like no one's ever seen a version of Drew where that one character who's the obvious, suspect ends up, being selected by the audience because no one wants the most predictable, obvious setup ending. They all want something that there's a little bit of surprise. They just want to know how that surprise works out.
Endings are so hugely important too, because it is when you end a novel,